The year is 1996. A sleek white dart pierces the stratosphere at twice the speed of sound. Inside, movie stars, hedge fund managers, and diplomats sip vintage Dom Perignon. They are crossing the Atlantic in 3.5 hours. From the outside, it is the pinnacle of human engineering, a triumph of Western capitalism, the Concorde. But the champagne, the speed, the exclusivity, they are all a glittering distraction. Underneath the pristine white fuselage hides one of the most spectacular financial illusions of the 20th century. To the passengers, Concorde is the ultimate luxury. To the accountants, it is a crime scene. A machine that defied gravity, but could never escape the crushing weight of its own balance sheet. We look at this aircraft and see a miracle of design. Delta wings shaped for supersonic drag, engines born from strategic bombers, heat-resistant bodywork built to withstand the friction of Mach 2. But we do not see the invisible architecture that actually kept it in the air. The hidden subsidies, the erased debts, the political trap that forced two rival nations to burn money for 15 years. This is not just a story about a fast airplane.
This is a story about how prestige blinds the powerful, how a project estimated at £160 million spiraled past £1.2 billion, and how, in the end, the British and French governments had to execute a staggering financial maneuver just to save face. They absorbed the entire development cost. They wiped the slate clean. They handed the planes to their state-owned airlines, effectively for free, just so the pride of Europe would not rot on the tarmac. The truth about Concorde is not found in its speed. It is found in a math equation that made no sense. An equation that ultimately destroyed the dream of supersonic travel forever, while quietly laying the foundation for a global aviation empire. The Trap is set in November 1962. In a grand room in London, British and French officials sign a treaty. It is a bold, almost arrogant piece of paper. The two nations agree to jointly design and build a supersonic transport aircraft. The estimated cost is £160 million, split down the middle. But this is no ordinary business contract. It is an international treaty registered with the United Nations, and it contains a fatal flaw. There is no cancellation clause. If one country wants out, they still have to pay. They have handcuffed themselves to each other, and they have thrown away the key. At the time, the logic seems unassailable. The jet age is booming. Speed is the ultimate metric of progress. America is racing to the moon. Europe decides to conquer the atmosphere. But the engineering required to push a passenger jet past Mach 2 is borderline science fiction. Standard aluminum melts from the friction heat. Standard jet engines cannot produce the thrust. The engineers must adapt Olympus engines from the Vulcan strategic bomber. They must design a complex delta wing. They must create a drooping nose just so the pilots can see the runway during landing. Every solution breeds a new problem. Every problem requires millions of pounds to fix. By 1966, the cost estimate doubles. By 1970, it quadruples. The politicians are trapped in a classic sunk cost fallacy. They have spent too much to quit, and quitting would mean international humiliation. But the numbers are getting worse. While British and French engineers obsess over breaking the sound barrier, across the Atlantic, an American company in Seattle is betting on a completely different metric: size. Boeing is building the 747, a massive subsonic behemoth that prioritizes passenger volume over speed. The Concorde is designed to carry 100 elite passengers. The 747 is designed to carry 400 ordinary people. The European governments look at the American jumbo jet and dismiss it as a flying bus. They are convinced that business travelers will always pay a premium for speed. They project sales of up to 400 Concordes to airlines around the world. But they are building a machine for a world that is about to vanish. The 1960s assumption of cheap, infinite fuel is a mirage.
And as the Concorde prototype takes to the skies in 1969, the economic weather is turning hostile. The treaties that bound the project together shield it from immediate collapse, but they cannot shield it from the market.
The engineers have achieved the impossible. They have built a commercial airliner that flies faster than a rifle bullet. But in doing so, they have engineered a machine completely divorced from commercial reality. The heat-resistant alloys, the afterburners, the specialized maintenance, they all add up. The estimated £160 million budget is now a distant memory. The meter is running, and it is approaching £1.2 billion. The British and French taxpayers are funding a billionaire's toy. And the airlines, the actual customers who are supposed to buy this marvel, are quietly doing their own math. They look at the operating costs. They look at the noise. The sonic boom makes overland supersonic flight politically toxic. The United States bans civilian aircraft from breaking the sound barrier over its territory. Suddenly, the market for Concorde shrinks to transoceanic routes.
The sales teams from the British Aircraft Corporation and Aerospace travel the globe, pitching their supersonic dream to Pan Am, TWA, Japan Airlines, and Qantas. They secure dozens of non-binding options. It looks like a success. But an option is not a contract. It is just a polite reservation. Behind closed doors, airline executives are terrified. They are looking at the fuel consumption projections. They are looking at the payload limits. They realize that Concorde is an economic time bomb. The treaty from 1962, originally designed to prevent either nation from losing their nerve, has instead guaranteed that both nations will ride the bomb all the way to the ground. The Prestige project has mutated into a financial black hole, and no one knows how to turn it off.
To understand how this disaster escalates, you have to look at the people pulling the levers. Not just the brilliant engineers in Bristol and Toulouse, but the cabinet ministers in London and Paris. They are playing a geopolitical game. France, under Charles de Gaulle, views Concorde as a declaration of European independence from American dominance. Britain sees it as the price of admission to the European economic community. The aircraft is merely a pawn in a much larger chessboard of national pride and diplomatic leverage. When Tony Benn becomes Britain's Minister of Technology in 1966, he inherits a project that is already hemorrhaging cash. Benn is a pragmatist, but he is trapped by the treaty. He tries to implement cost controls, but the technical challenges are too vast. The Olympus 593 engines, massive turbojets equipped with afterburners, require constant redesigns. The afterburners are necessary to push the aircraft through the transonic drag peak, but they consume fuel at a terrifying rate. The engineers are brilliant, perhaps the best in the world. They solve the intake airflow problems using a revolutionary system of computer-controlled ramps.
They master the thermal expansion of the fuselage, which stretches up to 10 inches during supersonic flight. But their mandate is technical perfection, not economic viability. There is no one in the room asking if the airlines can actually afford to fly it. The incentive structure is entirely broken. Because the state is paying the bills, the normal capitalist feedback loop is severed. In a private company, a project this over budget would be killed by the board of directors. But governments do not have boards of directors. They have voters, and voters love national triumphs. The British and French press celebrate every test flight as a victory over the Americans. The politicians bask in the glow of the supersonic prototype. They refuse to admit that the underlying economics are rotting. Meanwhile, the airlines are facing a brutal new reality. The global economy is shifting. The era of mass tourism is dawning. Airlines need lower seat mile costs to survive. The Boeing 747 offers a revolution in efficiency. Concorde offers a revolution in speed, but at a catastrophic premium. The politicians ignore the signals. They push forward, convincing themselves that once the plane enters service, the market will magically adapt. They are betting billions of pounds on the assumption that the laws of economics will bend to the laws of aerodynamics. It is a fatal miscalculation. The disconnect between the factory floor and the airline boardroom is absolute. The engineers view the Olympus engines as a triumph of thermodynamics. The airline executives view them as incinerators. Every meeting between the government officials and the potential airline buyers is an exercise in mutual delusion.
The officials point to the unprecedented speed. The airlines point to the unprecedented fuel bills. The gap cannot be bridged. And yet, the assembly lines in Filton and Toulouse keep running. The metal is cut. The airframes are built. The British and French governments are manufacturing airplanes for a market that effectively does not exist. They are driven by the sheer momentum of the 1962 treaty, a legal ghost that haunts every decision. They cannot stop. They must finish the planes, even if it means flying them into an economic mountain.
The mountain arrives in 1973. The Yom Kippur War erupts. The Arab oil embargo triggers a global energy crisis. The price of oil quadruples overnight. In the boardrooms of the world's airlines, panic sets in. Fuel is no longer a cheap commodity. It is an existential threat. And right in the middle of this crisis, Concorde's true operating metrics are exposed to the cold light of day. The numbers are staggering. A Boeing 747 burns roughly 65 gallons of fuel per passenger to cross the Atlantic. Concorde burns roughly 260 gallons per passenger. It is 4 times less efficient. At the exact moment the world runs short of oil, Europe introduces the most thirsty commercial aircraft ever built. The reaction is swift and brutal. The polite options evaporate. Early in 1973, Pan Am and TWA, the 2 most important American customers, announced they will not buy Concorde. It is a death blow. Other airlines follow in rapid succession. Japan Airlines, Qantas, Lufthansa, Sabena, they all walk away. The market for 400 supersonic jets vanishes, leaving exactly 0 private buyers. Only 14 production aircraft will ever go into commercial service.
And the only buyers are the 2 airlines that have no choice: British Overseas Airways Corporation, which becomes British Airways, and Air France. Both are state-owned. Both are ordered by their respective governments to take the planes. But even these state-owned carriers balk at the math. The executives at British Airways look at the capital cost of the aircraft. They look at the fuel consumption. They look at the limited routes. They calculate that if they have to pay the actual market price for the planes and pay off the development debt, they will go bankrupt. They refuse to buy them under normal commercial terms. A bizarre standoff ensues between the British government and its own national airline. The government demands the airline fly the pride of the nation. The airline demands to be shielded from the financial ruin the plane guarantees. This is the moment the £1.2 billion illusion is fully realized. The development costs have spiraled from the initial $160 million to over £1.2 billion. The money is gone, burned in test flights, wind tunnels, and afterburners.
If the governments force the airlines to absorb that cost, the airlines fail. So the politicians make the only move left on the board. They capitulate. The British and French governments execute a massive capital write-off. They effectively absorb the entire £1.2 billion development cost. They wipe the debt from the project's books. The state eats the loss. The aircraft are transferred to British Airways and Air France for a fraction of their true cost. In some cases, the final airframes are handed over for the nominal sum of £1. £1 for a supersonic marvel. It is a desperate accounting trick to hide the scale of the failure. By writing off the capital costs, the governments remove the heaviest burden from the airlines. They rig the game so the plane can fly without the crushing weight of its own creation. The truth is carefully managed. The public sees a glorious supersonic launch in 1976. They see the sleek white jets taking off from Heathrow and Charles de Gaulle, bound for New York and Washington. They see the celebrities and the champagne. What they do not see is the £1.2 billion crater left in the national treasuries. They do not see that every supersonic ticket is effectively built on a foundation of erased taxpayer debt. This distinction is crucial. When critics say Concorde lost money every time it flew, they are mostly wrong. Thanks to the massive government write-off, British Airways eventually figures out how to make an operating profit on the flights. They realize that the ultra-rich are price insensitive. They raise ticket prices to astronomical levels. They market it as an exclusive club. Because they do not have to pay back the research and development costs,
The revenue from the high-priced tickets actually covers the fuel, the maintenance, and the crew. The flights themselves eventually make money. But the project as a whole, the £1.2 billion investment, it is a total wipeout. Not a single penny of the development cost is ever recovered. It is the most expensive prestige project in European history, a financial hemorrhage dressed up as a technological miracle. The operating economics dictate everything. Concorde requires specialized ground crews, bespoke spare parts, and intense maintenance schedules. Every hour in the air requires hours of labor on the ground.
The heat cycle of supersonic flight ages the airframe in ways no other jet experiences. The sheer logistics of keeping the small fleet operational are staggering. British Airways dedicates an entire engineering division just to keep their 7 aircraft safe. This massive fixed cost is spread over a tiny number of flights. If a single plane is grounded for repairs, the revenue model fractures. The margin for error is zero. The airlines are flying a high-wire act every single day, and they are doing it with technology that is essentially frozen in the 1960s. While Boeing and Airbus continuously upgrade their subsonic fleets with modern computers and efficient turbofans, Concorde remains locked in its analog, fuel-guzzling architecture. It cannot be upgraded. It cannot be stretched. It cannot be made more efficient. It is a beautiful, static monument to a failed economic theory, a machine that conquers time but is utterly defeated by mathematics.
The story of Concorde usually ends with a tragedy in Paris in 2000 and a final melancholic flight in 2003. But the true legacy of the supersonic dream is not found in a museum. It is found in the sky today. The £1.2 billion write-off was a catastrophe, but it was not a total waste. The 1962 treaty that trapped Britain and France forced them to learn how to work together. It forced them to integrate their aerospace industries. They had to align their engineering standards, bridge their language barriers, and build a transnational supply chain. They built the infrastructure for a pan-European aerospace consortium. The failure of Concorde teaches Europe a brutal but necessary lesson. Prestige does not pay the bills. Volume does. Efficiency does. While the supersonic jets are flying billionaires across the Atlantic, the very same governments quietly pivot. They take the industrial machine they built for Concorde, they strip away the vanity, and they point it at a new target. They create Airbus. They stop trying to beat the Americans with speed and start competing with them on economics. The A300, the first Airbus aircraft, is everything Concorde is not.
It is subsonic. It is wide-bodied. It is incredibly efficient. It is designed precisely for the reality of the post-oil crisis world. Airbus becomes a global titan, eventually breaking Boeing's monopoly. And it only happens because the massive, expensive failure of Concorde clears the path. Concorde is the spectacular sacrificial anode of European aviation. It burned brightly, consumed massive amounts of capital, and ultimately failed. But in doing so, it protected and incubated the industry that followed. The great quiet mystery of Concorde is that its commercial failure was the exact mechanism required for Europe's future commercial success. It proved that state-backed technological gambles can reshape industries, even when the specific product is a disaster. The governments wrote off the £1.2 billion, but they bought an education in modern aerospace manufacturing. Today, we look back at the sleek white bird with intense nostalgia. We mourn the loss of supersonic travel. We wonder why we fly slower today than we did in 1996. But the market has already answered that question. The market chose the 747. It chose cheap tickets, mass transit, and fuel efficiency. It chose the boring reality of mathematics over the thrilling illusion of speed. The systems that run our world are entirely unsentimental. They do not care about prestige. They do not care how beautiful a machine looks against the sunset. They only care about the balance sheet. Concorde was a magnificent rebellion against that reality. When the final Concorde landed, it was not defeated by a lack of engineering brilliance. It was defeated by the exact same operating economics that were obvious in 1973. The massive state intervention simply delayed the inevitable by 30 years.
The taxpayers of Britain and France subsidize the ultimate luxury experience for a tiny fraction of the global elite, all to maintain the illusion of a victory. It is a stark reminder that when political incentives override market realities, the numbers do not simply disappear. They are just moved to a different ledger, hidden in plain sight, borne by the public. The ghost of Concorde still haunts every megaproject today, every state-sponsored technology race, every time a politician promises a revolutionary breakthrough without explaining the underlying cost.
The physics of sound can be conquered by a clever wing and a powerful engine. But who really pays the price when governments decide to fund a dream?